I think I should have dramatic music like that anytime I make an entrance into a room. If somebody has an extra orchestra that they want to loan out, I would appreciate it. Well, it is good to see you. Don't worry, Travis doesn't have twins. I'm just pulling double duty today. And it is Christmas in July here at Cambridge City Christian Church. And we did this last year, and I enjoyed it so much that when we were looking at the Movies series and thinking about what kind of messages we could give in some of the different movies that could tie into that, it seemed obvious when I saw that I'm going to be preaching this Sunday that we should do a Christmas movie. And there aren't many much more iconic Christmas movies than The Grinch. You know, it's amazing how happy Max looks compared to The Grinch. The thought of celebrating Christmas when temperatures are in the 80s is a little foreign to us up here in Indiana. When I lived in Florida, it was a little foreign to me, but not to everybody else. It's strange to think that there's no chance, probably, of snow today as we're talking about Christmas. And that's okay, though, because as Christians, we need to celebrate Christmas every day, regardless of if we get to dress up with a lot of fun Christmas attire like Renee. I appreciate the commitment to the Spirit. Or what kind of music is on the radio, whether there's a tree growing in our living room or gifts. The fact of the matter is we need to celebrate Christmas every day because Christmas is the celebration of God becoming a human and coming to earth. That baffles me. What's even more confusing to me is that he did this out of love for me. You too. And some people will say, well, the church really, I've heard this before, the church shouldn't put so much focus on Christmas. Easter's really the main event. And I don't disagree with Easter being the main event. However, would Easter have ever occurred without Christmas? No. So Christmas is a celebration of God becoming man. And if it hadn't happened, the resurrection wouldn't have happened, and we would all be destined to our eternity in hell. This is reason enough to live each day with an attitude of celebration towards Christmas, isn't it? And hopefully, as Christians, we can have that attitude of celebration. But I think we need to realize that not everybody is going to, regardless of whether it's July or December, not everybody's going to enjoy celebrating Christmas.
You're a mean one, Mr. Grinch. You really are a heel. You're as cuddly as a cactus. You're as charming as an eel, Mr. Grinch. You're a bad banana with a greasy black peel. You're a monster, Mr. Grinch. Your heart's an empty hole. Your brain is full of spiders. You've got garlic in your soul, Mr. Grinch. I wouldn't touch you with a 39.5-foot pole. You're a foul one, Mr. Grinch. You're a nasty, wasty skunk. Your heart is full of unwashed socks. Your soul is full of gunk, Mr. Grinch. The three words that best describe you are as follows, and I quote: stink, stank, stunk.
Your heart is full of unwashed socks? That is poetry. That is fantastic. I love the way Dr. Seuss thinks. Yeah, the Grinch, he hates Christmas. And he hates the Who's who celebrate Christmas. And he hates the fact that they do celebrate Christmas. He hates the toys and the noise and the feasts and, well, even the roast beasts. He certainly hates the gifts, but most of all, he hates the singing. Oh, how he hates their incessant singing. I know all of us know somebody that could be described as a Grinch. Let's just get them out of your mind right now. But why do you think that is? Why do you think that the Grinch hates Christmas so much? My thought is that he hates the unity. He hates the love that the Who's are displaying because it reminds him of how miserable and lonely he is. And rather than make the effort to try and join them in their celebrations and find some of that love, he would just rather try to bring them down to his level and make them every bit as miserable as he is. So, the Grinch decides to steal Christmas. And in doing so, he's going to prevent their celebration. He's convinced that if he takes away all the Christmas stuff, if the tree's gone, the ornaments are gone, the gifts are gone, the poinsettias, even the flying ones are gone, it's going to take away their joy. And then, if he takes away all their stuff, then they are going to stop singing and start whining. They're going to be upset. They're going to cry and they're going to wail, and there won't be any more reason to celebrate. And he decides that he's going to take away Christmas. But in his efforts to do this, he makes a key mistake. You see, the Grinch takes away their stuff, takes away the material stuff, their belongings, the things that they use to commemorate Christmas. But that's not what Christmas is about. It's not about gifts and presents, food, decorations. He can steal all of that, but what happens when they wake up? They aren't upset. You can imagine how our community would, and any other community for that matter, would react, though, if we woke up this December 25th and everybody's house was empty of all their stuff. It would be a struggle. We would all be stunned, and we wouldn't feel like celebrating. But that's not the case with the Who's. You see, they didn't let the Grinch steal their joy.
And the Grinch put a hand to his ear. And he did hear a sound rising over the snow. It started in low, then it started to grow. But this sound wasn't sad. Why, this sound sounded glad. Every Who down in Whoville, the tall and the small, was singing without any presents at all. He hadn't stopped Christmas from coming. It came. Somehow or other, it came just the same.
See, the Who's woke up with the same kind of joy that they had before. Even though their stuff was gone. They sang because Christmas was not about the stuff. They were thankful and they had each other and they sang. And the Grinch didn't realize that Christmas couldn't be bought and it can't be sold. Christmas is so much more than stuff that we can buy. Dr. Seuss absolutely got that right. The feeling of love we have for each other, that's all a wonderful part of it. He missed the part about Jesus, which is basically missing Christmas altogether, but we don't have to. We as people, even as Christians, we can fall into the trap with the consumer mentality, probably a little more than we'd like to admit. Now, we know that money can't buy us happiness, but doggone it if we don't think from time to time that maybe, just maybe, it can rent a little for us. Money does buy us toys and other things that we enjoy, and that's okay. We don't want to live a life of misery. But the absence of money, when we don't have enough, that creates stress. Sometimes a lot of stress. So money's not the answer, and stuff is not the answer. And I think if the Grinch can remind us of anything, it's the idea that we need to examine where our hope is placed and what or who is the true source of our joy. So yes, if somebody broke in to all of our houses and stole all the gifts, decorations, and even the Christmas ham, I don't know how many of you actually eat roast beast at Christmas, but we would all probably be off to a pretty miserable start to our Christmas. Let's be honest. I don't think any of us would wake up, see the empty house, and suddenly just start singing praises to God. The shock would be very real. How could this happen? You know, we'd probably call the police, and then there would be reports to file, and they'd have to call in the CSI investigators to be able to dust for prints and see what they can find. But I would like to think that as a Christian, at some point, hopefully sooner rather than later, I would stop and remember it's just stuff. And that I still have my salvation. I still have the true gift of Christmas. And we're the lucky ones. As people who have a Savior and recognize the need for a Savior, we're lucky. And not only do we know we need a Savior, we know Him. Imagine what it would be like if you didn't, and you'd have no basis for grace, mercy, love, no peace in your heart. People that don't have them, I don't know how you can find Christmas joy. So no, Christmas is not about gifts. It's not about even being filled with seasonal joy. It's not about spending time with your family, as the Who's seem to think it is. Those things are good, but that's not what it's about. Christmas is about a person. Christmas is about Jesus. Full stop. Christmas is about the one who was born as an outcast. His mother and father had been disowned by their families and their community. They were cast out with no mercy for them, except for a low-level innkeeper who showed them the most compassion anybody did by, well, allowing them, seeing as how Mary was a quite pregnant young girl, allowing them to stay in the cave where he kept his animals. You see, there was no room for them inside. There was no room for what the world perceived as an adulteress in the homes of her own family. There was no place for the King of Kings and Lord of Lords to be born except for a pigsty. That seems pretty harsh, doesn't it? Let's take another look at Luke 2. We read this every Christmas season, the beginning of this. In those days, Caesar Augustus issued a decree that a census should be taken of the entire Roman world. And this was the first census that took place while Quirinius was governor of Syria. And everyone went to their own town to register. So Joseph also went up from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to Bethlehem, the town of David, because he belonged to the house and line of David. He went there to register with Mary, who was pledged to be married to him and was expecting a child. While they were there, the time came for the baby to be born, and she gave birth to her firstborn, a son. She wrapped him in cloths and placed him in a manger, because there was no room for them in the inn. That tells us so much, but leaves out so many details when we think about it. But this is the real gospel. It's the real reason for Christmas. Jesus was born. Not exactly the way you would expect for a king, a ruler, to come into this world, right? The single greatest arrival in human history. It defied all reason and all logic. No one, whether they're Jew or Gentile, would have ever dreamed that God would come to earth as a human, let alone a human baby, helpless. And going even further, being a baby who was born in the least royal setting imaginable. But that wasn't all. No, God needed to announce to the world that he was there. And so how did he do it? Well, a little while later, some shepherds, who, by the way, they were some social outcasts themselves, they were the first to hear the good news. Angels came to them and told them about this amazing event. Now think about that for a second. The word of the Lord's arrival, it came not from heralds, not from breaking news. There were no parades full of people in fancy clothing. No, it was lowly, pathetic shepherds who were the first to know. And we still think that stuff matters to God. You see, nothing about Jesus' birth was predictable. And frankly, there was nothing about Jesus, period, that was predictable. But he gave us every reason to celebrate. And so I ask you, how do we keep our attitudes right and maintain, even embrace a year-round celebration of his birth? Well, there are a couple things I can think of. The first one is that we have to keep our priorities straight. And this is a challenge for all of us. Because stop and think, what was your focus at Christmas? Let's go a little more recent. What was your focus on Independence Day? Trying to not blow any fingers off, right? What about your birthday? Is the most important thing on those days, are they the parties, cookouts, the gifts, the cake, all of your favorite things? Or is the most important thing to worship the Lord? After all, that's why we're here. That's why we were created, was to worship him. Do we become consumed with the things of this world? Sometimes the things that we can't afford to buy or we shouldn't afford to buy? Or do we become consumed with the celebration of a gift that we've already received and no one can buy? The other thing we can do to try and maintain an attitude of celebration, once we make sure that our priorities are straight, is we can just seek the joy of the Lord. Thinking back on the shepherds, they didn't have much. They didn't even really have their sheep sometimes. They would take care of them for people who were going to sell them for money, and they just paid them a pittance. But regardless of what they had or didn't have, more appropriately, they were so excited about what they were seeing God do. They were excited about the possibilities of God. Mary and Joseph, they didn't have much. Yet the scriptures show that Mary took the positive things that she learned about her baby and she treasured them in her heart. And to her, they were worth more than gold. We're talking about the difference between happiness and joy. And I've heard people teach in the past about the difference. And it's a very nuanced thought because those two words are used interchangeably frequently. But there is a significant difference that I see between them. You see, first we start with happiness. And happiness is based upon external circumstances. Happiness, the way I see it, is external. It's about getting expensive gifts, good food, maybe even just having friends. All of these things can bring happiness, but happiness is only temporary. It won't always be there. See, many people each day lose those things. They lose their money. They lose their jobs. They lose their friends. They can't trust and rely on happiness. But joy, that comes from within. See, it transcends our circumstances. God's blessings in our life. That's where joy comes from. Joy comes from God, and it can't be taken away. We can try and push it away, but it can't be taken away. It's kind of, have you ever been by a large body of water or an ocean when a storm starts to churn up? It can be amazing to watch it coming in. When we lived down in Florida, that was one of the neatest things to see a storm rolling in over the Atlantic Ocean. But it probably wasn't as neat if you're out on a boat at that time. Because what happens when a storm comes in? It starts churning up the water, and you see these swells that come up, and they start pounding on the sides of the boat from starboard to port, and it's overwhelming. It can be frightening. But veteran sailors know that their boats can handle it. At the same time, though, most of them never lose their feeling of awe when they see the ocean and the might churning up around them. And joy has the same capacity to really just flood our lives. And I hope we never lose our awe for the fact that God gives us so very much. Just like each wave crashing against the boat, joy swells when God pours out his blessings on us. And it's going to spill out of your heart in showers of praise and of gratitude. Yet while happiness is often fleeting, and it disappears when circumstances change, like the Grinch expected to happen when he stole Christmas, joy remains constant. remains constant. Even in the darkest times, you can find joy in the Lord. It becomes an anchor upon which we can hold on. My family lost a friend about 3 years ago. Was it 2 years ago or 3 years ago? A woman named Lois, who she had so much joy. Her family didn't have a lot by the world's standards, but she had the joy of the Lord. Even as she was fading away in her last days, she would find joy. And it was contagious. It was a reminder that even in the darkest times, we can find joy. Joy remains when happiness flees, and this is the story of Jesus. This is what Christ brought to us when he came. It's the joy of forgiveness. It's the joy of grace. It's a joy of mercy, and it's a joy of his love. So, how do we deal with joy? I've got a suggestion. Let's be a bunch of who's. They didn't have Jesus, but they had a lot of happiness. Their own version of joy wasn't permanent, although they seemed to think it was, and they acted like it. We actually have permanence in who we celebrate. So let's live a life of joy in every season in celebration of our risen Savior. Now, aside from the fact that this honors God, which is reason enough to do it, the other thing we can think about, I would venture to guess most of you have seen the Grinch at some point or another. What happens to the Grinch at the end? He's drawn to the who's. He's drawn to that love and that celebration and that joy. So your joy, my joy, if we live lives pointing to Christ in celebration, may just point somebody right to him. And if that happens, well, I guarantee you that their heart will grow 3 sizes that day.